The grand ballroom of the Crestmont Hotel stood bathed in a gentle golden hue, the glow of chandeliers reflecting softly off polished marble floors. Staff moved with rehearsed precision, arranging crystal glasses and adjusting table settings. Outside the tall windows, dusk settled over the city, casting long shadows against the velvet drapes. Guests began to filter in, the quiet hum of luxury fabric and polished shoes filling the air. Women in floor-length gowns and men in tailored suits greeted one another with practiced smiles, the subtle scent of expensive perfume lingering in their wake. Evelyn Carter stepped through the entrance without fanfare, her presence marked by quiet confidence rather than spectacle. Mid-30s, poised, her steps were measured, unhurried. A simple, well-fitted black dress hugged her frame, understated among the extravagant ensembles surrounding her. Her eyes, warm yet sharp, took in every detail as though memorizing the scene. She held no clutch, wore no jewelry, yet carried herself with a grace that required none. As she crossed the threshold into the main hall, no one turned their head. To most, she seemed invisible, perhaps mistaken for part of the service staff. A waiter, hurrying past with a tray of champagne flutes, barely glanced at her before redirecting his attention to the high-profile guests demanding his focus. At the registration table, two hostesses skimmed their guest lists, their eyes sliding past Evelyn as though she weren't meant to catch their attention. A brief moment passed as Evelyn approached, her gaze resting momentarily on the ornate banner draped over the main stage. Annual Crestmont Charity Gala. There was a flicker in her expression, too subtle for anyone to catch, but there nonetheless. "Ma'am, service staff should use the rear entrance," one of the hostesses said lightly, not unkindly but dismissively, her eyes never fully meeting Evelyn's. Evelyn offered a slight, composed nod. "I'm not with the staff," she replied, her tone calm, almost serene. But the hostess had already turned back to her clipboard, her attention fixed on verifying last-minute arrivals. The flow of elegant guests continued, men adjusting cufflinks, women smoothing silk gowns. Evelyn took a quiet step aside, not to retreat, but to observe. Her gaze moved over the room deliberately, landing on the details most others overlooked. The chipped edge of a marble pillar, the uneven hem of a staff uniform, the subtle nervous energy among junior employees preparing for a flawless evening. From the corner of the room, a junior staff member noticed her, his brows knitted together in faint recognition. There was hesitation in his posture, as if wrestling with a memory just out of reach. He took a step forward, then thought better of it, returning to his task of aligning place cards along the sprawling dining tables. Behind the grand decor and polished etiquette, there was an undercurrent of tension Evelyn could almost taste in the air. Her eyes softened, but she masked the recognition that flickered within. She had been in such rooms before, though under very different circumstances. Memories, long buried, edged closer to the surface. Voices that once doubted her, faces that once dismissed her presence just as easily as they did tonight. Nearby, the event coordinator, a man with sharp features and a sharper tongue, murmured to his assistant about the tight guest list. "We can't afford slip-ups this year," he said under his breath. "Keep an eye on any stragglers." His words brushed past Evelyn like a cold breeze, but she remained rooted, her posture relaxed yet unyielding. It was not the first time she had been mistaken for less than she was, and it likely would not be the last. The junior staff member stole another glance in her direction, uncertainty clouding his face. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Perhaps he wondered if he had seen her in passing during the earlier preparations, or if she simply resembled someone from a forgotten memory. Either way, he turned back to his duties, leaving the moment suspended in quiet anticipation. Evelyn's attention lingered momentarily on the seating arrangement at the far end of the hall. Names written in looping gold script adorned each place. Card. She searched almost idly, yet with a purpose she kept close to her chest. Her name was not there. Not that she expected to see it. Not tonight. She let out a breath, so soft it was almost imperceptible. Her eyes, however, remained sharp, watching, waiting. Every detail, every conversation, every dismissive glance etched itself into her mind like strokes of a painting she knew well but had not seen completed. Not yet. Evelyn stepped closer to the reception table, her movements smooth, deliberate, as though time itself had slowed to accommodate her quiet determination. The hostess, a woman groomed for efficiency over empathy, scanned her clipboard once more, with mechanical precision. Her brows furrowed ever so slightly as she flipped through the pages, her finger trailing the neatly printed names. But Evelyn's was not among them. With a tight, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes, the hostess lifted her gaze, as if seeing Evelyn properly for the first time. "This is an exclusive gala, ma'am. Invites only." Her voice carried a practiced edge, the kind used to politely dismiss without causing a scene. Evelyn's expression did not flicker. Her reply was steady, almost gentle. "I know," she said, her gaze steady. "I'm exactly where I need to be." For a beat the hostess hesitated, her eyes narrowing just slightly. Then, brushing off the odd remark as the confusion of someone out of place, she tucked her clipboard against her chest and turned to signal for assistance. From a short distance, a voice laced with casual arrogance cut through the ambient chatter. "Problem at the entrance?" Richard Morton, the event organizer, approached with the ease of someone used to commanding attention. Tall, impeccably dressed, his sharp gaze swept over Evelyn like a scanner searching for flaws. The hostess's expression stiffened as she briefed him in hushed tones, but not so quiet that Evelyn couldn't hear. "She claims she belongs here, sir, but there's no record." Richard allowed a shallow chuckle to escape, the kind designed to make others feel small. "Gatecrashers?" he said, as if tasting the word. "Always think a bold face will pass as a ticket." His gaze lingered on Evelyn, something sharp and vaguely familiar flashing behind his eyes, like a memory that refused to surface fully. He dismissed the thought just as quickly. Evelyn, unfazed, met his stare with quiet composure. "Perhaps I could check the seating chart myself," she suggested, her tone still smooth, controlled, as though speaking to a peer, not a gatekeeper. Richard's smile deepened into a sneer, mockery barely hidden. "I think we can manage without the help, thank you," he replied, waving her off as one might a leaf on the wind. Behind his bravado something gnawed at him. An uneasy shadow stirred, but he forced it down beneath layers of ego and authority. As the exchange unfolded, Evelyn felt the familiar prickle of past humiliations brush against her calm facade. How many doors had closed in her face before this? One? How many times had she been told she didn't belong in rooms like this? Her chest tightened momentarily, a silent echo of old battles, but she didn't allow it to reach her eyes. Nearby, the junior staff member from earlier leaned toward a colleague, his voice a whisper shaded with uncertainty. "She looks familiar. Wasn't she part of the old ownership team?" His companion shook his head, uncertain, unwilling to linger on a question that felt just out of reach. "Can't be," came the reply, doubt heavy in the tone. "That was years ago, but the seed had been planted, and it twisted quietly beneath the surface." Evelyn's gaze drifted across the ballroom, her eyes pausing as guests settled into their velvet chairs, place cards glimmering under soft lights. She noted faces she recognized, some vaguely, others far too well. Conversations ebbed and flowed, laughter rising like waves against a rocky shore. These were the people who once moved in circles far above her reach, unaware of the quiet revolutions that turned beneath their feet. A pair of uniformed staff members approached with wary expressions, summoned by the hostess's earlier signal. One of them, a young man with a clipped tone, spoke first. "Ma'am, if you'd please step outside, we'll have to ask you to leave the premises." For a moment, time stretched taut between them. Evelyn remained perfectly still, her eyes calm, her breath steady. She studied the young man's face, noting the discomfort that flickered in his gaze. Then, with a voice as soft as velvet but carrying unmistakable weight, she replied, "Let's not make a scene. I'll wait." The staff hesitated, glancing between one another as uncertainty rippled through their ranks. She wasn't raising her voice, nor was she resisting. There was no outburst, no desperation. Just quiet certainty, rooted deeper than they could fathom. Somewhere nearby, Richard Morton scoffed beneath his breath, turning away as if the matter were beneath him. But as Evelyn's eyes followed his retreating form, a flicker of recognition sparked, not from her, but from him. Something about her presence gnawed at the corners of his mind. An old photograph turned to life, a name he couldn't place, but felt he should remember. Evelyn, still poised, let her gaze drift back to the seated guests, watching as the evening's pageantry unfolded without her. Yet beneath the polished exterior of the event, cracks had begun to show. Small, nearly invisible, but real. She allowed herself no triumph, no premature satisfaction. Only patience. She had learned long ago that in rooms like this, patience was the sharpest blade. The soft chime of glasses clinking together floated through the grand ballroom as waiters navigated the maze of guests. Silver trays balanced effortlessly in their gloved hands. Laughter rose and fell like a rehearsed symphony. But beneath the polished surface, a quiet disarray had begun to unfold. Behind the scenes, whispers spread. The evening's host had not yet appeared. The program, carefully timed and printed, in gold-embossed script, sat untouched at each place setting, waiting to be followed. Staff clustered at the edges of the room, paging through their notes, checking their watches, exchanging worried glances. Richard Morton's composure, so tightly held until now, began to fray. His jaw tightened as he tapped briskly at his watch, frustration flashing in his eyes. He scanned the room as though the sheer force of his gaze might summon the missing host from thin air. "Where is the host? We're running behind schedule." He snapped at an assistant who flinched before hurriedly checking her earpiece and mouthing a quick, anxious reply. But no answer came. Richard's impatience thickened the air. He turned sharply, his gaze landing momentarily on Evelyn. She stood precisely where she had been, unbothered by the growing chaos around her. Her expression remained composed, almost knowing. As if she, somehow, had expected this disruption. His irritation deepened at the sight of her calmness. "Who's holding up the program?" he barked to no one in particular. "Get the owner on the line, now!" His assistant, quick to obey, pulled out her phone and stepped aside, thumbing through her contacts with frantic precision. Moments later, the call was placed. The phone rang once, twice. Evelyn's own phone, nestled in the small interior pocket of her coat, buzzed against her side. Slowly, deliberately, she retrieved it, her movements unhurried as if she had all the time in the world. She glanced at the caller ID, her lips barely curving at the edges. Then she answered. "Hello?" she said softly, her tone smooth and clear, amidst the swelling tension in the room. Richard, unaware of whom the assistant had reached, barked into the receiver. "Sir, we have a problem." There was a beat of silence. Not technical, intentional. "You're speaking to her," Evelyn replied, her voice steady, neither loud nor boastful, yet carrying enough weight to still the air between them. The color drained from Richard's face as the words sank in. He turned slowly, eyes widening with a dawning recognition that made his breath catch. His gaze locked on Evelyn, standing there with the phone still to her ear, poised like a quiet storm that had finally arrived. All around them, the crowd continued in their shallow conversations, unaware that the very axis of the evening had shifted beneath their feet. A few sharp-eyed staff caught on, their whispers weaving through the air like rising smoke. Evelyn lowered her phone, ending the call with an almost surgical precision. She tucked it away and met Richard's stunned stare with the calm assurance of someone who had already won a battle long before it began. A memory surfaced, unbidden but sharp in her mind's eye. She had stood in this very hall months earlier, though then it had been empty, its grandeur dimmed by absence. The former owners had been desperate, their voices tight with worry as they explained their situation in hushed tones. She had listened, carefully, weighing every word, every plea, before signing the papers that transferred ownership into her hands. Not out of revenge, not for vanity, but because she saw potential in these walls, a chance to turn history into her own future. Quietly, efficiently, she had taken control, knowing full well that there would come a moment like this. Now, that moment had arrived. Richard's mind scrambled to process what stood plainly before him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, he watched as Evelyn took a single step forward, not with aggression, but with rightful claim. The murmur of guests began to fade, their attention slowly drawing toward the subtle shift in the atmosphere. Without raising her voice, without demanding recognition, she made her way toward the center of the room, her presence gathering weight with each step. Those who had ignored her moments ago now parted instinctively, uncertain but compelled. Richard found his voice, though it came out hoarse. There must be some mistake, he tried, but even to his own ears the protest felt hollow. "There's no mistake," Evelyn replied, her gaze unwavering. "You asked for the owner. I answered." A hush settled over the ballroom, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Faces turned. Conversations died mid-sentence, and the realization began to seep into the gathering like water through cracks in stone. What had been, just minutes before, an evening of predictable pomp, had transformed into something none of them had anticipated. Something far more real. Evelyn did not gloat. She did not need to. Her very presence spoke all that needed to be said. And just like that, the audience felt it. The undeniable shift. The weight of the real story beginning to unfold before their eyes. The weight of silence hung heavy over the ballroom, thick enough to press against every breath. Evelyn stood at the center of it, not elevated by spotlight or announcement, but by the undeniable gravity of her presence alone. Her eyes swept across the room, steady and unhurried, capturing the flickering uncertainty on every face. She did not need to raise her voice. Calm and firm, she let her words carry naturally into the quiet. "Good evening," she began, her tone composed yet edged with quiet authority. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Her gaze shifted deliberately to Richard, whose face had lost its earlier color, arrogance slipping like sand through his fingers. He opened his mouth to protest, but the words tangled in his throat. His eyes darted to his staff, to the assistant, who still held the useless phone in her trembling hands, to the reception table where the clipboard sat like a symbol of misplaced power. "I stand before you not as a guest tonight," Evelyn continued, her voice unwavering, "but as the owner of this venue." A murmur rippled through the crowd, sharp and immediate. Guests exchanged glances, brows raised in disbelief, some leaning toward one another with hurried whispers. "She owns this place?" The question shot through the room like an electric current, stunning those who had dismissed her just moments earlier. Richard's composure cracked further as reality bore down on him. His jaw tightened, his hands curling into loose fists at his sides. Behind him, the staff scrambled to correct the oversight, their movements suddenly respectful, nearly frantic. The hostess who had first turned Evelyn away now flipped through her clipboard as if expecting her name to magically appear, her earlier confidence replaced with nervous uncertainty. Evelyn stepped toward the table, her posture straight, her presence commanding without need for force. "If you don't mind," she said with quiet clarity, extending her hand for the seating list. The hostess, her hands unsteady, passed it over without a word. Evelyn scanned the names carefully, pausing just long, enough for the tension in the room to twist tighter. Her eyes traced the list, row by row, until she reached the end. With a slight lift of her brow, she closed the booklet and held it at her side. "I see my name isn't here," she observed, her voice smooth but edged with cool sharpness. "Curious, since I signed the final checks for tonight's event." The words, though calmly spoken, landed with the force of a gavel. An uncomfortable shuffle spread through the crowd. Glasses paused mid-air, conversations halted mid-thought. Eyes that had once slid past her now fixed on her with a mix of astonishment and something closer to respect. Richard tried to reclaim his footing. "There must have been a mistake," he said hastily, but his voice lacked conviction, brittle beneath the weight of exposure. Evelyn's gaze met his with quiet certainty. "Yes," she agreed simply, "there has been." Her eyes then drifted past Richard to the junior staff member who had earlier hesitated, the only one who had looked at her not with dismissal, but with something resembling recognition, perhaps even respect. Without hesitation, Evelyn extended her hand toward him, inviting him forward. "You," she said softly, yet her words carried through the space. "Would you join me at the head table?" The young man's eyes widened in surprise, caught between disbelief and the flickering pride of being seen. For a moment he hesitated, glancing around as if seeking permission from invisible forces. Then, gathering himself, he stepped forward. With measured steps, every pair of eyes in the room following his quiet ascent. Shock deepened across the ballroom. Whispers buzzed, overlapping in hushed waves. "She owns the venue?" someone gasped. "That's Evelyn Carter, wasn't she?" Another voice trailed off, unfinished yet heavy with realization. Richard's expression tightened further, his authority unraveling thread by thread. He could feel the shift beneath his feet, the power he thought immovable now slipping from his grasp. Evelyn guided the junior staff member to the prominent seat beside her, placing him at the table reserved for the event's elite. His face, still touched with awe, glowed with quiet pride. She offered him a gentle nod, a silent acknowledgement of his simple decency amid the storm. Then, with the grace of someone who belonged beyond doubt, Evelyn reclaimed her place at the event. No force was needed. No demands were made. Her mere presence, grounded, unshakable, had done what no announcement ever could. The crowd adjusted, as though an invisible hand had realigned the evening's hierarchy. Guests who had earlier dismissed her now watched with veiled respect, some with admiration, others with regret for their earlier assumptions. Conversations turned, perspectives shifted. Richard swallowed hard, his gaze lowering, any defense he might have mounted dissolving under the weight of truth. Evelyn, poised and composed, allowed herself a single quiet breath. Not relief, not triumph. Something deeper. A moment of recognition for the journey that had led her here. For the battles fought far from the public eye, and for the quiet victories won long before this night. She did not need applause. She did not seek validation. Her place, firmly claimed, needed no further confirmation. The hush that had settled over the room did not lift easily. Even as glasses were carefully set back on tables and guests tried to smooth their expressions into neutrality, the weight of the moment lingered, undeniable and heavy. Evelyn let the quiet hang for a breath longer, as if allowing every person present to sit fully in the reality of what had unfolded. She rose from her seat at the head table, her posture as steady as her gaze. Without need for a microphone, her voice carried effortlessly across the ballroom, not by volume, but by presence. "I hadn't planned to speak tonight," she began, her tone even, warm but edged with the resilience carved by years of quiet battles. "But it seems life has a way of offering unexpected invitations." A few uncertain chuckles rippled through the crowd, quickly dying off into attentive silence. "My father," she continued, her eyes softening as they swept across the hall, "once worked in this very venue. Not as a guest, nor as an honored speaker. He was part of the service staff, the ones who make evenings like this seamless while often going unseen." Her words held no bitterness, only truth, and that truth settled over the room like a velvet weight. "He taught me something far more valuable than any title or position could offer," she said. "He taught me that dignity is not given by others. It is claimed every day, in every choice you make. He taught me to carry myself with quiet strength, even when no one is watching." Across the crowd, faces shifted. Some lowered their eyes, discomfort creeping in. Others looked at her with new respect, the realization dawning slowly but surely. Richard Morton, standing awkwardly near the reception table, cleared his throat. Color flushed back into his cheeks as he stepped forward, the eyes of the room pulling toward him like magnets. His earlier arrogance had drained away, replaced now by visible discomfort, his hands nervously adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice tight but genuine, "for my assumptions, my behavior tonight." Evelyn met his gaze without hostility, but also without indulgence. "Apology accepted," she replied smoothly, then allowed a heartbeat of silence before adding, "But understand, apology alone does not repair what must be changed. This place will change, starting tonight." The quiet authority in her words left no room for argument. Richard, humbled beneath the calm force of her conviction, could only nod. Evelyn's attention shifted, softening as it landed on the young staff member seated beside her. He sat straighter now, no longer shrinking beneath the weight of the moment. There was something in his eyes, the flicker of hope, perhaps, or the first taste of possibility. "Never let them decide your worth," Evelyn told him, her words carrying the weight of a personal truth shared freely. "No list, no title, no seating chart can define you." His throat bobbed as he swallowed, eyes glistening slightly. He managed a nod, gratitude unspoken but deeply felt. Around them, guests who had been mere spectators now found themselves participants in an unexpected transformation. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others looked on with something closer to admiration. The room felt different now, less like a hall of exclusion, and more like a space reclaimed. Then, with a quiet breath, Evelyn let the final surprise unfold. "I'd like to make an announcement," she said, her gaze sweeping once more across the crowd. "Starting with tonight's gala, this venue will sponsor programs for underprivileged talents, young artists, performers, thinkers, those who have never been offered a seat at tables like these." Gasps followed, genuine and unrehearsed. Conversations erupted in murmurs, heads turning, eyes wide. The realization of her purpose, far beyond personal victory, landed with the force of a revelation. "This room," Evelyn continued, her tone firm but inviting, "will no longer be reserved for the few. It will become a place where new voices are heard, where potential is seen beyond appearances, beyond status." The young staff member beside her swallowed hard, visibly moved. Even Richard, standing on the periphery, felt the shift. Whatever bruised pride remained in him faded beneath the tide of something larger than his earlier vanity. The atmosphere softened, as though the walls themselves breathed a little easier. Evelyn did not bask in the moment. She simply took her seat once more at the head table, her expression calm, her satisfaction quiet and deeply rooted. The young man remained beside her, no longer hesitant, now fully present. The event, which had begun as a showcase of elite privilege, continued under a new light. Conversations, once shallow, found depth. Eyes, once blind to those outside their circle, now saw differently. And as the evening unfolded, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of reflection. Not pride in the way some might expect, not the hollow victory of proving a point, but a deeper, quieter triumph. The fulfillment of a journey walked in silence until this very night. She glanced once toward the empty chair at her side, the one that had symbolized her father's absence for so long. In her heart, she filled it with his presence. Tonight, they learned the difference between invitation and inclusion, and the lesson would not be forgotten. As the chandeliers continued to cast their light across the hall, the story of the night lingered in every corner, etched not into programs or name cards, but into memory. Not a spectacle, but a quiet revolution. Not noise, but a lasting echo. Not just a moment, but a legacy.